Hallo zusammen. Today's topic. I will share my screen. Today's schedule. I don't think I need 45 minutes for the presentation, but just to be safe. And after that, we have 15 minutes for questions. You can leave at any time. But it's nice to be here with you. Yeah. So if you can make it, I'd appreciate that. Don't underestimate the power of your presence. Sentence structure is mainly defined at this point. We will look at the sentence structure from a point of view looking at verbs, and then later at, let's call it objects, other things than verbs. Yeah. So the verb in the German language is the sun. Everything circles around the sun, which means in a sentence, everything circles around the verb or the verbs if there are several of those. And we have four, actually there's also five, if not six thinkable possibilities. You can have a single verb in a sentence, 2, 3, or 4. Here's an example. Ich höre dich. I hear you. Ich habe dich gehört. For example, in the past tense, you have two verbs, three verbs. Ich habe dich kommen hören. I have heard you coming, like in English, have heard coming. And four verbs. Ich hätte dich kommen hören können. I could have heard you coming. And the good news is we will focus on single and two verbs, and for entertainment purposes, I will show you three verbs. So single and two verbs cover 80%, if not 90% of your needs. Let's take a look at single verbs. There is, we have, let's say, two kinds of sentences. One is main clauses and the other is dependent clauses. So we always look at these two. Any other type of sentence is not relevant for us today. Ich höre dich. Yeah, very simple. You see, ich is the one that is doing the listening. It can stand in front of the verb or after it. The verb and the subject, this is the orange word, are in love with each other, and they are 90 to 98% of the times directly next to each other. And you can see in front of the verb, there could also be a combination of other words like your mother, I'm hearing. In English, I would rather say it's your mother that I'm hearing, but your mother I'm hearing, your sick mother I'm hearing. So it could even be three words. And then another one at the end, deine kranke Mutter höre ich heute. And if I wanted to put the heute to the front, how would I do this? Think a little bit with me if you can. This is it. And there's a reason for this. So I didn't just put the heute in front of deine kranke Mutter or after deine kranke Mutter. In English, things like this would be possible, but in German, you can only have one kind of information in front of the verb. Yeah, your sick mother is basically one information. But if I added heute to it today, your sick mother is already who or whom am I hearing? And today would be when. So we have two questions we would have to ask. Yeah. And that is impossible in German. So keep that in mind. Many people struggle with having a lot of words in front of the verb. The verb hören here is always, in all cases that you see, on position 2. And the rest I call rest for now. There's other terms. I will introduce one more to you, actually both. But this is a very important thing that many people don't get. Sometimes they think the verb is in the wrong position. No. There is one kind of information in front of it, and höre is at position 2 here. Now that's the main clauses. Let's take a look at the dependent clauses. In German, that's called Nebensätze, next to sentences. So these four words here are so-called conjunctions or subjunctions. I call them pushers because they push something to the end. And what should they push? We are talking about verbs. It's of course the verb. Let's take a look how this works. So if I have the sentence if I have the sentence ich höre dich, I hear you, but I add the weil, something changes. Let's take a look at the other three sentences and then you will see what changes. Ich höre deine Mutter, ich höre deine kranke Mutter, ich höre deine kranke Mutter heute. Now, if I add the weil, I cannot have the höre here. The höre needs to be pushed to the end. So we have to delete this and put it here. Et voila, we have a beautiful, perfect German sentence. Because are you here? When are your mother here? Whether are your sick mother here? And that are your sick mother today here? And if you translate this in English, you feel like, wow, what a weird language this is, this German, right? But you don't have to think that much, and you don't have to translate anything. You just have to remember, if you see a pusher, and I like pusher better than subjunction, which, you know, has a meaning, but it's a bit hidden. It just pushes the verb to the end mechanically. And you have to train this in a manner that actually makes this automatic. And the other thing, if you have a pusher, it is always in love with the subject. And so the subject in most cases, 98%, is directly after the pusher. And you know, in German, the Germans are a bit traditional. You cannot have two love interests at the same time. That's for French. So you remember that the verb höre was in love with ich before, but as weil comes to it and is a pusher, it pushes the other love interest to the end. Yeah, as far away as possible so that there is no conflict of interest. Next level, two verbs in main clauses. Clause is just another fancy word for sentence. I actually didn't look into the etymology of this word. So, let's take a look at this. Ich kann dich laut und deutlich. Dich is klar, you, and laut and deutlich. Laut sounds like English loud, and it's exactly what it means. Deutlich means, has nothing to do with German, Deutsch, clearly. So, I can you loud and clearly. But what? Kann alone doesn't give me enough information. But let's take a look at a couple of other examples. I have you. I have you what? Ich werde von niemanden. I am being by nobody. I'm being what? And I will, in a second, something from my wife. Or what? So you see, if you have words like this coming so early, that doesn't help you at all getting things. And it's also hard to predict what the main message is here because there is no context. So here's another example, which is a bit different, but I wanted to add it here because it works the same way. I am sleeping soon. So I need to add a verb that has a meaning. Ich kann dich laut und deutlich hören. I can hear you loud and clearly. Ich habe dich gehört. I have heard you. Ich werde von niemandem gehört. I am heard by nobody. I'm not being heard by anybody. Ich werde gleich was von meiner Frau hören. That's the future. I will hear something from my wife, which means she's going to tell me off. And now, ich schlafe gleich is not really part of this whole thing, but I thought, why not add this? Ich schlafe gleich ein. This ein changes the meaning of schlafen. Well, this example is not the clearest, because if I say schlafe gleich means basically I'm almost asleep in a second, in a moment, while ich schlafe gleich ein means I am falling asleep in a second. Gleich means in a second here, in a temporal sense. Yeah. But you see as well, in German, you have to wait to the end to actually get the meaning of things. And what you see here is what we call the Satzklammer. I used the scissors. You could imagine that it's half a scissor left and half on the right. The Satzklammer means kind of a bracket, sentence bracket. The first verb and the second verb embrace the main part of the sentence, this part, which we call middle field, like in soccer. Yeah, and in the middle field, you provide some additional information, but the main information is, if you ask me, given by the verb most of the time. The ich is what we call the Vorfeld from before. It's something that can be in front of the first verb, and I kept it simple here. As you've seen, it could be more complex. And then there is something we call the Nachfeld. It's almost like a football game, soccer game, but Nachfeld is something I don't want to bother with in this presentation. It's more relevant in B2, C1, and even then you will survive without knowing what a Nachfeld is and what it does. You will come across certain exceptions or certain situations where you have learned, oh, the second verb always goes to the end, but then suddenly there is a bit more text. That's because there's a Nachfeld and certain kind of information can go there. I just wanted you to know there's for, pre, middle, and after field. Now, a beautiful question mark. What might come now? Well, I want to illustrate to you what I've done. It's just a review. So without the second half, there's absolutely no way or a very slim chance that you figure out what the speaker wants from you. So these two belong together. You need to complete the Satzklammer also for Germans to understand you. But there is an interesting piece of information. The first part, you see, I've highlighted the endings. The first part tells us about who is actually doing what, because you see here it ends in E. Kann is a bit irregular, but that tells us the Ich is the main person doing something here. So it's rather formal information. The first part also tells us about a mode, like modal verbs. So they tell you, is it allowed? Is it forbidden? Is it a must? Should I do it? It tells us about a tense. For ich habe dich, I have you. It could be past tense, very likely is. It could be a passive or it could be the future. So, so tense and mode are indicated by the first one. Why that is, don't ask me. I would have put that to the end because I always would like to know the meaning first, but unfortunately, the Germans put the meaning to the end. Tada, it's revealed. So you need a good short-term memory. The good news is I just took random examples. These sentences would usually come within a context, and the context is what gives away the meaning. So very often you can hear the meaningful verb before you actually hear it with your ears. But this, as it's so different from English and many other languages, except Turkish beats this, and Finnish very likely too, and Hungarian also. So it indeed takes time to get used to. Now let's move on to dependent clauses with two verbs. Here we have two verbs. This is a normal sentence, as you can see. Ich kann dich laut und deutlich hören. I can hear you clearly. Ich habe dich gehört. Ich werde von niemandem gehört. And so on, the same as before. You don't even have to understand that as long as you see the Satzklammer is still active. Now I add one of those pushers. And you remember the pusher pushes verbs. So pushers always push the verb that is nearest to them, because you cannot push something that's far away. You need to push something that's next to you. And hören, gehört, and the blue verbs are already at the very end, so there's nowhere to push them. No fun in that. So it needs to go to the end. Let's do that now. They cannot stand there anymore. They have to go to the end. And now, from what I understood, they kind of build a unit which is part of the new Satzklammer. So a Satzklammer can also be built by a pusher with these kind of verb combos. So just to give you a little visualization of what's going on here. And remember the weil, als, wenn, das, they are in love with the ich, so they are 98% of the times next to each other. There's always exceptions to everything, but you focus on exceptions once you are bored, which means in level C1 or C2, early enough. And some exceptions come so often that you will pick them up as you go. Don't worry about exceptions. It's okay to take notes, so it helps you to focus, but taking notes doesn't mean you transcribe everything you see. It's not necessary. I want you to lean back and relax. Rather try to follow my point here. It's more important that you understand principles. The practice happens in your German course, wherever you do that. And your teacher actually should help you to internalize this information. Such a masterclass can never be sufficient for you to fully be able to apply what you learn. But if you understand the principle, it puts you at ease. And the next time you see it in your course, it clicks. Take the pressure off your shoulders. It's unnecessary at this point. There is one beautiful possibility in German. Let's take a look at what I call the standard order. You could have a standard sentence. You don't have to scream, schreien, to scream, and then you put the dependent clause after. That's a standard order. That's how I would suggest you write until the end of B1. Unless you feel very familiar, very comfortable, then you can play around with this in the manner that I will present to you in a second. Now we have something that's what I call the reversed order. You could start with a while sentence, but then something happens. So this is the dependent clause. But if you start with a dependent clause, and with most dependent clauses, you can do that, not with every kind of dependent clause, you see something change. Weil ich dich laut und deutlich hören kann, musst du nicht so schreien. Because I can hear you loud and clearly, you don't have to scream so loudly. Now, that's the main clause. Let me tell you, the blue must, is in both orders, standard and reversed order, on position 2. And that is because the dependent clause, while clause, push-out clause, takes position 1. Let that sink in. That whole sentence takes a position, one position only. So many words, just one position. And the must is properly in position 2 as it's supposed to be. Here we are. So now you can relax. The bunny comes. Let's look at something just for fun. And I only go into the 3 verbs situation. The 4 verbs was just too nonsensical. It's beautiful for grammar geeks, but let me spare you that. So, du hörst mich laut und deutlich. I developed this. So, of course, there's only one verb here, hörst. Let's add another verb, for example, werde. Ich werde laut und deutlich. This is the passive. I am being heard loud and clearly. And you see what happens. The mich turned into an ich and the du went away. That's what the passive does. It's a completely different topic, but it's just one possibility. I could have also taken the past tense, but I like this one. Now, let's add another verb. So I want you to notice that whenever you add a verb, you add it on position 2. And there was a verb before, so the new verb pushes the old verb to the end. Werde pushed hören to the end, and it changed its form as well. Now bin pushes werde to the end. Gehört stays where it is. No further movement here. It's not juggling. It's really just one at a time. German is very structured, very beautiful. Ich bin laut und deutlich gehört worden. I have been heard loud and clearly. So the bin pushes the werden to the end, and it needs to turn into worden because it is the past of the passive. So that's 3 verbs in main clauses. Let's take a look at a dependent clause, at a while clause. Now you see there is no verb yet. Any guesses how I would distribute the gehört, the worden, and the bin? The verbs don't change. You just have to arrange them. Can you try this? Let's see how much you already got from this little presentation. You don't even have to understand what you're saying here. It's very mechanical. Even if this was all gibberish, you would be able to put them in the right order. Gehört, worden, bin. See, you can build proper German sentences without understanding a single word, although you've heard the meaning of this already. Now, there's one beautiful, let's call it mindfuck. One little information. There's one infinitive in gehört, worden, bin. Oh, that's actually not even true. Worden is not really an infinitive. Please ignore that. But let's assume. There is examples where there can be one infinitive. Let's take a look at one more example, then the fun part is over. Ich höre dich laut und deutlich. Now kann pushes the hören, and kann requires an infinitive. Now let's add another verb, so we get our 3 verbs. Habe. So, ich habe dich laut und deutlich. Hören stays where it is. And now habe pushed the kann to the end and it needs to change. The past of kann is ironically an infinitive. Yeah, modal verbs are a bit special. Don't worry about this. It's really something that will be presented to you at the right time by your German course or your German teacher. Now, the fun begins. Dependent clauses. Because I try this one. And I tell you, it's a trick question. So if it's a trick question, where can the habe only go? Yeah, I make it easy for you. Hören, haben, können. Yeah, that's the other possibility, but hören and können, I love to stay together. So what's left? You see the gap? Isn't it beautiful? Weil ich dich laut und deutlich habe hören können. Because I have been able to hear you loud and clearly. Gorgeous. So the problem here is, or the reason why the habe doesn't follow the beautiful rule I just showed you, is because we have two infinitives here. This is stuff for B2 and onwards. It's just for entertainment here. Yeah? Lean back and be happy that if you are not too far into B2 yet, you can just lean back and ignore all this. But if you come across, you might remember there was something weird. Quickly, the order of objects. Objects is a very, I use it very broadly here. It's not as precise as I would like it to be, but let's stick to it. So next to verbs, you have objects. Sometimes they come with a preposition, and some people call them prepositional objects, sometimes without. Yeah? The real objects are always without prepositions, but for this purpose here, let's take a look. So you see here 4 Latin words, temporal, causal, modal, local. What they mean will become clear in the next 5 minutes. The first sentence, so we've covered the verb positions. Ich habe gegeben, I have given. Verbs are clear, yeah, or will be clear as soon as you come to that lesson in your course. Now, if you say I have given, the first thing I would think is, what? What have you given? And that thing that has been given is always in the accusative. Let's say ein Teeservice. A service is a kind of set of tea pots and plates and cups. Yeah, so a service. I'm not sure what you call this. A set, maybe in English. So that's the first thing I would think about. I have given a tea service. Service. Sorry, it's not a service. It's a service. French, I think. And then I would maybe ask, okay, but to whom have you given this? Because if you give something, you usually give it to someone. And in German, to whom would be wem. And as many English speakers do not speak as precisely, they sometimes say to who. Yeah? Or who have you given this to? But it's really whom. The problem is whom is not only reserved for the dative in English, or yeah, it might also address a German accusative. So the translation doesn't help you much. Let's say meiner Mutter. And you can see maybe if you have some experience with dative, meiner Mutter, even though it's feminine, die Mutter, it ends in er, der Mutter, it's dative. So I talk about this a little bit more. This is the simple version. You have a what do you give and a whom. And in this case, where you can have two objects, that's only with certain verbs like giving, gifting, sending, bringing. There's always something you can bring to someone. It's not with every verb. When that is the case, usually the person receiving the thing is in the dative, while the thing you give is accusative. Keep that in mind. Now, why all the fancy Latin words, you might wonder. Here is your answer. So we can, of course, put a lot of information into every sentence, many sentences. And one could be information about time. Yesterday, when. A reason, because of her birthday. Wegen ihres Geburtstags. It's a genitive, don't worry about it. Mit Liebe, how? Yeah, with love. Actually, the color is wrong. It should be orange. My apologies. Auf der Arbeit, information about the place, where or where to sometimes, if you move somewhere. So this is a horrible monster sentence, which is only here to show you the order or the suggested order of things. Don't expect any grammar rule to be followed meticulously by Germans. These are just rules of thumb. These are here to make your life easier. So you only have to remember that the order of anything in a sentence is, well, dative, object, then temporal, causal, modal, local, and then accusative. Very simple, no stress, right? Okay, let's make this easier. The order of objects. Again, to remember the order of these things, there's only one word you have to remember, and that's the word tea camel. If you don't know what a tea camel is, it is a German breed of camels, which 2000 years ago, when the German language was created, was still alive. It's extinct nowadays. This is the memory, in memory of the tea camel. We have this session today. And the tea camel looks more or less like this, the last existing picture. Here it is. Remember the tea camel, commemorate it. It was a great contributor to the German language. So T, as you can see, reminds you of temporal, K, causal, me, modal, L, local. Temporal, temp, if you speak French, le temps, but temporal means time. Causal, what caused this is the why. The modal, how. The local, where. Very simple. So enjoy the tea camel. Now, let me make your life a lot easier, because the tea camel actually very rarely shows up in its entirety. For example. Yeah. So the main thing you will have to deal with are two things. First, sometimes you have verbs that allow two objects. It's not always the case. And by objects, I mostly mean things like this. There is no preposition here. Yeah. If there's a preposition, things change. Prepositions are nasty little bugs. They dominate a certain area of the sentence. That's a topic for another masterclass one day. For now, keep this in mind. If you have this order of objects, you always have the dative first and then the accusative. And the way to remember this, the picture already gives a little bit away, is to remember German is pretty dada. German is dada, that means dative before accusative. There is exceptions, which I do not talk about here. I talk about that in my course, but for a rough overview, if you have two objects, it's the dative that comes first. And there is one exception, which you will figure out yourself. Yeah, I have to leave a little bit of the discovery to you. Now, if we take a look at our monster sentence from before, we don't really need wegen ihres Geburtstags. We rarely use mit Liebe. So we are left with the usual Dada, meiner Mutter ein Teeservice, and we have information about time and about place. Gestern auf der Arbeit. And it's always in this order. Again, every rule can be broken, but you, as a learner, until the end of B2, keep in mind that you put time before place. It's one of the most common mistakes. This rule helps you avoid most of your mistakes. And place could be a place where you already are at, or it could be a place that you're heading towards. Yeah, so I could say, ich bin gestern zur Arbeit gefahren. So I'm driving to work. That means I'm heading towards work. This is the most important rule. Dada, if you want to put meiner Mutter ein Teeservice in the proper order, and time before place, yesterday at work. And that's different in other languages. Keep that in mind. Temporal, local, just a different way. That was it. For those who are not working with my course yet, you can try the first free lesson, which is vast and will provide you with a lot of information, not about this in particular, because this is an advanced topic, but it will show you how to deal with articles and also how to actually properly organize your learning and what really matters when you learn German. This is stuff almost nobody ever tells you, not on YouTube nor anywhere else in classes. I've worked with many people So it's a unique chance for you to really get an insight into highly efficient German learning, and also German learning that is actually highly enjoyable. Because while it is a lot of work, hard work can be very rewarding if done right and if you actually see the fruits of your work. And this is what Smarter German is all about. So take your camera, copy this, or Google Smarter German. Ideally, you just enter smartergerman.com into your browser and then you click around. Yeah. If you need any support, let me know. But it's pretty self-explanatory. Können wir jetzt gehen? Now you have to stay with me for the rest of the day, Lavia. Okay. Have a lovely evening and hope you enjoy your German learning no matter what. Yeah. And one last reminder, don't take things so seriously. Things are, in the end, not as complicated as they might seem in the beginning. It's just that you have very little insight into the whole at the beginning. Yeah? Da. Paka paka.